The woman who walked out of camp. Some people come to Africa searching for adventure. Others come looking for animals they have only seen in documentaries or photographs. But every now and then someone arrives carrying something heavier than luggage, something invisible, something they rarely speak about. I remember one woman in particular. She arrived late in the afternoon on a small charter aircraft that landed on a narrow strip of red earth carved into the wilderness. From the air the land had looked endless, golden plains stretching toward distant hills, broken only by dark clusters of trees and the silver ribbon of a river. When the aircraft door opened, the heat rushed into the cabin like a living thing. It carried the smell of dust, dry grass, and sun-baked earth. Most travelers step off those planes excited. They take photographs, they laugh, they talk loudly as if trying to announce their arrival to the entire continent. But she stepped down slowly, carefully, almost as if she were crossing an invisible line between the world she had left behind and something much older waiting on the other side. She was traveling alone. That wasn't unusual. Many people come to Africa by themselves, but there was something different about her silence. During the drive to camp, she sat quietly in the back of the open vehicle. The bush rolled past in wide waves of tall grass and scattered trees. Every now and then a herd of impala lifted their heads and watched us pass before melting back into the landscape. A giraffe stood in the distance like a sculpture carved from the horizon. Most first-time visitors ask endless questions during that drive. What animal is that? How far are we from camp? Are there lions here? But she didn't ask anything. She simply watched. The wind moved through her hair as the vehicle followed a sandy track through the wilderness, and the expression on her face looked less like excitement and more like someone trying to listen to something very far away. By the time we reached camp, the sun had already begun sliding toward the horizon. Safari camps at that hour are quiet, in a particular way. Canvas tents stood beneath tall trees, their shapes glowing softly in the fading light. A small fire burned in the center of the clearing, and the smell of wood smoke drifted slowly through the air. Somewhere nearby, a dove called. The other guests were already gathering for dinner when she arrived. Lanterns hung from tree branches, casting warm pools of light across the table. Glasses clinked softly as people spoke about the animals they had seen that afternoon. The conversation drifted easily between stories of travel and wildlife sightings. Someone described a leopard they had watched resting in a tree. Another guest spoke about elephants crossing the road just before sunset. Now and then, laughter rose from the table. Beyond the lantern light, the bush stretched into darkness. And then, somewhere far away, a hyena called. The sound floated across the night like something ancient and slightly unsettling. Several guests paused for a moment before laughing nervously. But she didn't laugh. She simply listened. Her eyes drifted toward the darkness beyond the firelight, as if the sound had touched something inside her that the others could not hear. Later that night, the camp slowly fell quiet. One by one, the lanterns were extinguished. Guests disappeared into their tents. The fire burned low, leaving only glowing embers and the soft crackle of wood collapsing into ash. The African night is never truly silent. Wind moves through the trees. Insects hum in the grass. Occasionally a distant call rises from somewhere, far out in the darkness. It must have been some time after midnight when I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. They were slow, careful, not the quick, nervous movement of someone rushing somewhere, but deliberate steps moving quietly through the sand. For a moment I lay still, listening. In the bush you learn very quickly to pay attention to sounds at night. Another step, then another. I stepped outside. The night air was cooler now, and the sky above the camp was scattered with more stars than most people ever see in their lives. Near the edge of the firelight, I saw her standing alone. She was looking toward the river. The embers from the fire cast a faint orange glow across the clearing, but beyond that, everything dissolved into darkness. Then, somewhere far away, a lion roared. The sound rolled across the landscape like distant thunder. It wasn't just something you heard. It was something you felt, a deep vibration that seemed to pass through the chest and into the ground beneath your feet. She didn't move. Most people react to that sound with surprise or excitement, sometimes fear, but she simply stood there, listening. I walked a little closer and told her quietly that guests usually shouldn't walk around camp alone at night. There are reasons for that. In places like this, the line between human space and wilderness is thinner than people imagine. She nodded gently, as if she already understood, but she didn't look frightened. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved slowly through the trees. Somewhere near the river, something splashed softly in the water. Then she spoke. Her voice was calm, but there was a tiredness in it that people carry only after long battles they never expected to fight. She told me she had come to Africa after her life at home had quietly fallen apart. 20 years of marriage had ended only weeks earlier. Not with anger, not with a dramatic explosion, but with the slow realization that two people had become strangers while living under the same roof. When it finally ended, everyone around her offered the same advice. Go somewhere relaxing. Take a holiday. Clear your mind. But she said relaxation was the last thing she wanted. I didn't want comfort, she said softly. I wanted silence. For a while we stood there without speaking. The bush has a strange way of making people honest. Perhaps it is the darkness. Perhaps it is the vastness of the land around you. Or perhaps it is the realization that in places like this, human problems suddenly feel very small. Whatever the reason, people often say things in the African wilderness that they might never say anywhere else. After some time she returned quietly to her tent. The fire finally burned out, and the night continued the way it always does in the bush, full of unseen movement, distant calls, and the quiet passage of animals through the darkness. The next morning the camp woke slowly. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Coffee steamed in metal cups. Guests gathered near the vehicles for the early drive. But before we left, one of the trackers called us over to the edge of the clearing. There, pressed clearly into the sand, were lion tracks, large ones. A male. The prints were fresh. He had passed through the camp sometime during the night. The tracks moved calmly between the tents before disappearing toward the river. For a moment, everyone stood silently, staring at them. It's a strange feeling to realize that while you were sleeping, one of the most powerful predators on the continent walked quietly through the same space. Some guests reacted with excitement. Others looked slightly unsettled. But she stepped forward and studied the tracks for a long time. Then she smiled, not a wide smile, just something small and quiet. Later that morning, as the vehicles drove out into the open plains, the rising sun turned the grasslands gold again. Animals moved slowly through the morning light. The world looked exactly the same as it had the day before, but something about her seemed different. Her shoulders were lighter, her gaze steadier. She stayed only 4 days, just 4 days, in a place that had existed long before her troubles and would continue long after them. When the small aircraft returned to collect her, she climbed the steps and paused for a moment at the door. Then she looked back across the endless plains. Perhaps she was trying to remember the feeling of standing beneath that enormous sky. Or perhaps she was simply saying goodbye to a silence she had needed more than she realized. Africa does not fix broken lives. The wilderness does not solve human problems. But sometimes, in the quiet places of the world, people remember who they were before the noise of life drowned out their own voice. And sometimes that is enough to begin again.